Sorry about that. Good morning. We'll continue our study in 1 Corinthians, beginning chapter 13 and verse 1, and continue our study that Shane has been leading us in. And before we begin the study, we'll read the chapter. Of course, Apostle Paul being the speaker here. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not love, I have become sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to, to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. But whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part will be done away. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known. And now abide faith, hope, love. These three. But the greatest of these is love. And to back up just a little bit to make a point, in verse 27 of the preceding chapter, chapter 12, verse 27, and now you're the body of Christ and members individually. And of course, he's talking to the church of God, and he's talking about you. You are members. And God has appointed these in the church, first apostles. Well, the Apostle Paul was an apostle, and he was in the group that sat first in the church. So he brings it down to, maybe I shouldn't say bring it down to his level, brings it up to his level. In reading in chapter 13, he didn't say though you, it says though I speak. Pardon me. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not love. We have an apostle who could speak with tongues, and in the next chapter, he spoke in tongues more than them all. But though he spoke with tongues, or languages, not just of men, but of men and angels, that's broadening the spectrum a little bit here. We can have people or a person, and if he could do that and didn't have love, he's become as a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. Just something that's just almost meaningless. You hear something, it becomes annoying. I think these wind chimes you hear are pretty cool. Sometimes you hear them for about 5 seconds, but you hear them all night. You might think, boy, that's annoying. But here we have a clanging cymbal, a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal, and it's of no value. But an apostle who was first set in the church first by God in the church, and he did that? You mean he become one of those? But he goes on further. And though I, an apostle, chosen by God, and though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, that's impressive to me. You take someone that can do that, and I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge. Understand it all. Not part of it, all of it. So I understand it all. And have not love. Well, it continues on. All mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains. I don't know about y'all, but that'd be impressive to me if I could see somebody that could move a mountain. Literally move a mountain. That'd be pretty impressive. But he goes on to say, but have not love, I am nothing. Nothing. It's hard to get past nothing. I mean, when you're empty, nothing, and you have all these great, if you have a resume and you try to put forth, try to put forth all your good experiences and education and what you've accomplished and all you've done, and then if he could have done those things and didn't have love, nothing. So if this should impress upon us the importance of love and what it is, and we need it. He needed it, Apostle Paul. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, a lot of people say, boy, he's a good giver. Well, that's great, and we all should be good givers. But, just because a person is a good giver and doesn't have love, that doesn't make up for it. A lot of people say, well, I may not love like I need to, but I did all this. Well, have known people who didn't believe in going to doctors for religious reasons and would die. And, just immediately you think, well, wow, if somebody believed it to the point that they would die for something, they must be something to what they believed. Well, he said if he gave his body to be burned, didn't have love, nothing. Zilch. So the importance of love is something that we need to grasp and embrace and infuse into our lives. But, like some people think, well, I'll do this and I'll do that. And the people who think they can, quote, work themselves to heaven, earn a place in heaven. Apostle Paul points out here that although he could do all this, it says, though I give my body burned and have not love, it profits me nothing. So, wow. So you can say, well, they believed in what they believed and they gave their life for it, but now what? If you don't have love, you don't have nothing. Apostle Paul did not have anything if he didn't have love. And so he goes on to point out what love is and what love is not. So sometimes, we have a explanation of something and we say what it's not, and that helps us maybe better understand what it is. But in verse 4, love suffers long and is kind. I know it's impossible for us to meet the Apostle Paul, but we read of the many things he's done and encountered, and the 39 stripes that he endured, and the stoning, and it's just, it would be something to meet someone like that. But love, and I feel confident that the Apostle Paul had these characteristics, but love suffers long and is kind. And since we don't have all knowledge and have faith to remove mountains, since we don't have that, and since we don't have supernatural gifts, we can have love. And now when we're thinking about these aspects of love, we need to consider ourselves and look inwardly and say, do I have that? Love suffers long. Do we suffer long? Are we kind? Sometimes we can hear people preach a good sermon, and not to take where the word's always powerful, the power of God is in the gospel. But maybe we hear a good sermon, or we hear somebody pray a nice prayer. And, maybe use, just good words, and we need to use good words when we're praying. But, when it comes down to it, the preacher needs to preach a good sermon, but he needs to live a good life, and we need to live a good life. And nice prayers are great, and we need good prayers. But, we need to make application of the gospel to our lives. And as Apostle Paul confronted the Apostle Peter, and when he saw that he was not walking uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I'm sure that Apostle Peter was not proud of that fact. And, when we do something wrong, we should not be proud of that fact. But love suffers long and is kind and does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up. And if you think about all the accolades that could be attributed to the Apostle Paul, the speaker here, or the writer here, who's writing by inspiration, by the way, had, think, wow, he, when he walks in the room, he should command some attention, and maybe, and if that got to him, he could parade himself into a room, and then all the people just, ooh and all over him and all that. But love doesn't parade itself, and it's not puffed up. So we need to take a look at ourselves and look in the mirror as we're about to see further on down in this chapter and see ourselves. Does not behave rudely. Some people just have the disposition, it seems, that if something comes up and you think of an issue and you think of this person and you think about when this person hears this issue, how they're going to react. Well, some people just seems like it's in their nature to behave rudely. We don't need to be that way. We don't need to be rude to people. Now, I understand people use sarcasm and fun and not maybe hurt anybody's feelings, but, for a laugh. But, when it comes to actually getting down to the nitty-gritty, we don't need to be rude. And they say, well, it's just my nature. No, well, we need to get rid of that nature because love doesn't act that way. Love does not behave rudely, does not seek its own. In different social atmospheres and workplace or just in social climate in the community and all, that people have this idea of backstabbing and, betraying each other just to get ahead. Like, well, if I've got a goal in mind and you're not going to be in my way, I'm going to get ahead. But love doesn't seek its own. It's not provoked. Maybe because I'm as old as I am, I have to watch myself because somebody will say something and I have to, I don't need to be easily provoked. But it says it's not provoked. Thinks no evil. Have you ever heard anybody bring up something and maybe it's good. It's good. But right off, maybe they're trying to characterize that and put it in an evil frame of mind and say, what's evil about it? Or you ever meet someone and all you know is that you met them and you don't know anything really about them, and maybe start having preconceptions and prejudice about what kind of person they are. And you start thinking evil thoughts about people. And we don't need to jump to conclusions. Now, when the facts come out, and they may be a better person than what you thought they were, they may be a worse person, but we need to have a mindset of thinking positive, I guess you would say. Thinks no evil. Does not rejoice in iniquity. Ooh. Our friends in the denominational world have a problem with that. And in the great judgment scene in Matthew chapter 7, about verse 21, when people would stand before God himself and argue with God himself, have that kind of puffed upness, if that's a word, it's probably not, but to be puffed up so much that argue with God himself. We done many mighty works in your name. Well, and do you remember what he told them? Let's look at what he told them. Matthew 7. Verse 21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me, this is Jesus speaking, in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then Jesus will say, and then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. I believe the King James Version says iniquity there. But here, does not rejoice in iniquity. I don't know how many of y'all have been to denominational churches, but those who go to what's charismatic or Pentecostal, maybe they believe in miraculous events, and just rejoice in it, maybe actually physically start dancing or running around the room and just like, love doesn't rejoice in iniquity. Love does not do that. And yet all the time they're thinking, oh, we're doing right. We are doing right. But love doesn't do that. Doesn't rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. And I think if someone went into one of those assemblies and started preaching the truth and teaching the truth, for some reason they wouldn't rejoice in that. Because that run counter to what they do and their practice and what they believe. But you know, what a blessing it is here to hear someone proclaim the truth and for us to read the truth and for us to rejoice in that. You know, maybe you hear an instrument, a sound of an instrument, and someone can harmonize with that instrument. And some people can harmonize with that instrument. And, you know, just the sound is off. And when we hear the truth spoken, and we know it's the truth, and we can rejoice in it because it sounds true, it's in tune with the gospel. It's not off key. And these people who believe otherwise have got a problem. And the sad thing about it, they've got a problem, they don't know it. And, you know, we need to be on guard against things like that, too. We don't need to let lies creep in and corrupt the truth and us rejoice in that and us not even know it. You know, I guess that's another definition of the idea of deception. If we let people deceive us. And, you know, if I'm deceived, I feel pretty good about it because I feel satisfied with it because I'm deceived and I think it's right. But I'm not judged on my feelings and how I feel about it. We're going to be judged by the truth. And, you know, that rings true and should ring home to us that we're going to be judged by the gospel. Bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. You know, and just those few phrases, a lot is said. A lot of times we don't have perseverance. We don't have steadfastness. You know, those who received seed when the word was sown, you know, they just couldn't take it. You know, sun rose, you know, we got hot, you know, just we need to solidify our faith and believe it strongly and deeply and to the core. But when we're easily shaken, you know, don't be shaken like, you know, tossed about with every wind of doctrine. You know, if somebody comes along and says, well, you know, those people that believe it's all right and believe in miracles happening today, boy, I go to their meetings and when I leave, I just feel so built up and so happy and boy, it's like a pep rally. I remember when I was in school back in the 60s, they had pep rallies and, you know, that's to pep up the spirit of the team in the school. And, you know, and you go to these religious services and they would come to a service here and they'd probably say, well, you know, it's so cut and dried. I just couldn't get into that. Well, you know, we have to have the concept of we're here to please God and not here to please ourselves. And we need to worship God in spirit and in truth. But we will bear all things, believe all things, hope all things, and endure all things. Sometimes our endurance can run thin. Our patience can run thin. And when it runs thin, we're asking for trouble. You know, we don't need to let it get to that point. You know, if you have a vehicle, you do preventative maintenance. change the oil, change the air filter, change the tires. And it's not like some people believe that once you accept Christ your personal Savior, and I'm not making light of that. We need to accept Christ as our personal Savior, but that's all you do. Just maybe make a mental assent and maybe make say, well, I accept Christ as personal Savior, and so eternal security. I've got it. I can't lose it. Wanted to, that type of thing. But we need to continue to do preventative maintenance. Love never fails. You go to the store and you get these products and say, well, it's got a lifetime guarantee. Well, it makes you feel good, doesn't it? See something that's got a 1-year guarantee and you got a lifetime guarantee, I think I'll go this way. Here's the guarantee that we have: love never fails. And that's not backed by some company somewhere. That's backed by God himself, because God is love. He's the very essence of love. He never fails. But in contrast to what's been talked about earlier, it says love never fails, but a contradictory conjunction here, but whether there are prophecies, they will fail. So we've got an inspired man here, Apostle Paul, writing this, and as a saying, you can take this to the bank. Whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Not they might fail, could fail, depending on who it says it, depending on the sort, no. Whether they're prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Kelly Maddox and I were talking Wednesday night about a person who was in conflict on this. That they believe they should speak in a tongue to be right with God, and they have not, and they felt disappointed. But here God has revealed to us, whether there are tongues, they will cease. And take that to the bank too. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away. Now people say, well, that can't be this time and age, because, look at all the knowledge that's been exposed just in the last 30 years. We have the internet, and, you can get all kind of information. I was growing up, I went to the library, and, you had to go through all these research books. And now you can just stay at home and look on the internet, and you get all kind of information. And say, well, that's knowledge, so that hadn't vanished, that hadn't ceased. The kind of knowledge we're talking about here did. We're talking about supernatural knowledge. We're not talking about knowledge of how to build something, or we're talking about knowledge, supernatural knowledge from God. It says it will vanish away. And then it gets sort of to explain a little more. For we know in part, Apostle Paul saying we, he, and others, for we know in part and we prophesy in part. So we know some about what's going on, and we act on that. But when that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part will be done away. So these things that are in part, we know in part, we're prophesying in part, but when that which is perfect comes, it's going to be done away. Now, it's not done away because I want it to be this. No, I want to have the gift of speaking in tongues. I want to have it. No. When that which is perfect has come. But see, a lot of people, you talk to them, I say talk to them, you maybe hear them and say, well, that's Jesus when he returns in his second coming, and he's the perfect one. And so tongues will last till then, knowledge will last till then, supernatural faith that you can move mountains will last till then. But look what it says here. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part will be done away. For all these temporary spiritual gifts is ceased when that which is perfect came. And Apostle Paul draws a parallel. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. And there was nothing wrong with that, by the way, because that's the way things work. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. So, there is a growth here. There's an intellectual growth in a normal human, when they're born, and then as Christ grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man, there's a progression. You grow intellectually, you grow socially. There's different ways we grow. But when he became a man, he put away childish things. He don't act like he did when he was a child. And when the church was in its infancy, when the church had apostles set in them first, but we don't have apostles in the church today other than the apostles that were in there in the first century. The perfect has come. And he points out, now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. If you ever take a shower in the morning and the mirror fogs up and you look, you can see yourself, but you really can't get a good look of what you really look like. But we just can see yourself, but not clear. But we know in part. And he said, now, when he wrote this, now we know in part. But then, when that which is perfect has come, then I shall know just as I also am known. And that makes me think of the book of James. And when we talk about that which is perfect, and in James, the first chapter, be in verse 22, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourself. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man observing his natural face in the mirror. Well, now, we had Apostle Paul over here describing, looking and just not seeing clearly, dimly, and just not seeing like we should. But now, if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, is like a man observing his natural face in the mirror, for he observes himself. So here we're not looking through a fog, dimly, darkly. We observe ourselves. Goes away and immediately forgets what kind of man he was. But the next verse, verse 25, but he who looks into the perfect law of liberty, into this mirror that we can see clearly, and continues in it. And how do we see clearly in the mirror? We look in the mirror. If a sinner looks into a mirror and he sees himself and he's a thief, well, this mirror will show that. you look into this mirror, the perfect law of liberty, being a thief is condemned. Being a liar is condemned. Being so many things is condemned. So if you look in the mirror and you see what kind of person you are, you make adjustments. And not like a forgetful hearer. It says, if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man observing his natural face in the mirror. For he observes himself and goes away and immediately forgets what kind of man he was. You know, you get people who don't want to hear the gospel. You know, they say, well, that's not for me. You know, I love getting ahead in this world, and I love being an extortioner. I love whatever, you know. And so he don't tell me about it, don't want to hear about it, don't even mention it. I don't want to see myself. But he that looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues in it, in other words, he's a doer of it, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this one will be blessed in what he does. So that we have the perfect law of liberty in Ephesians chapter 4. To me, it's not exactly a parallel reading, but it's sort of parallel. But when, and I'm going to leave the parenthetical expression out, therefore it says in verse 8 of chapter 4 of Ephesians, therefore it says, when he ascended on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts to men. Christ ascended on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts to men. And verse 11, skipping the parenthetical expression, and he himself, Christ, gave some to be an apostle. Apostle Paul was one of those guys. Some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers. And the reason why he gave them gifts, it was for the equipping of the saints, for the work of the ministry. So, you know, if you got a task to do, we got a task to do, and you know, if we got the proper tools to do it with, we can be properly equipped. But Christ gave gifts unto men for the equipping of the saints for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ. And then the next verse is a telltale verse because there's a time element involved. Till we all come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. Why? Now, you know, that was the time element, but that we should no longer be children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the trickery of men in the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting. People will deceive us. We got to be careful. Don't be deceived. Because we're deceived, we'll feel good about it and go to hell smiling. But speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things into him who is the head, Christ. But see, that when that which is perfect has come, when I think about this verse, to all come to the unity of the faith, when I think about the completed scriptures, to all come, when all the prophecy was done, all the miraculous events ceased, and that which is perfect came, to all come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. If these scriptures do not represent the measure and the stature of the fullness of Christ, I have no idea what it is. But since we have that which is perfect, and that which is perfect has come, and Jude would reiterate this, so to speak, in Jude verse 3, Beloved, I was very diligent to write to you concerning our common salvation. I found it necessary to write to you, exhorting you to contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints. It's, you know, I don't know how many times I've heard Carol say, you know, then you need a loose leaf binder. You know, if revelations just keep coming, we just need to just keep putting them in there. And you hear all these guys and women too now who have these ministries, and maybe God told them something. Well, you know, somehow or another that don't make its way to my book here. But boy, that sounds good. Probably sounds good to their followers. Well, God told me. And Edwin Dixon, who's a friend of mine, whose dad is a Methodist preacher, he would, I guess, make light of this sometimes. Says, God told me he was going to give me $100. Well, and then the person said, no, he didn't. Say, well, you calling God a liar? I mean, you know, well, you know, God doesn't speak to us that. God doesn't tell us things like that today. God has got his word revealed to us in the scriptures. We have the complete revelation. Now, it's our duty and our obligation. We're obliged to obey it. The last verse, and now abide faith, hope, love. And the King James says charity. These three, but the greatest of these is love. The greatest. You know, he was in verse 31 of the previous chapter, but earnestly desire the best gifts. So, like, some gifts were better than others. And in verse 14, that, you know, prophecy was better than speaking in tongues. But love is the greatest. And, you know, when we understand what love is and what love is not, we need to apply that to our lives. And don't let people try to tell you that spiritual gifts are still in operation and will be in operation until that which is perfect, which they say is the Christ, comes. And, of course, the Christ is perfect. I'm not saying he's not. But we have the perfect law of liberty. And we have what we need. We've got all that we need to be pleasing to God. Thank you for listening.